Hello, my name is Natalya Brown, and I'm a current senior at Meredith College. In the fall of 2020, I conducted my research and wrote my culminating honors thesis, combining the disciplines of sociology, criminology, and Spanish. My thesis is entitled The Impacts of Othering on Central American Immigrants and Refugees at the Southwestern United States Border. I focus on immigration and how sociological theories can guide the way that um, can guide our analysis of what has happened at the border. To begin, I'm going to give a little introduction into the situation of immigration in the United States in the past decade. There's been an increase in the number of immigration and the number of immigrants coming to the United States. This change and the increase has been coupled with a demographic change. More women and families are coming now than before, and they are staying for longer periods of time. While men used to come for seasonal jobs, stay a few months out of the year, and go back to their home countries, currently more women and children have been seeking refuge or asylum or have come to immigrate and become eventually naturalized citizens to the US. This has been paired with an increase in right-wing populism, xenophobia, and nationalism within the United States. This is a reaction to the increase in immigration and manifests itself in violent discourse and rhetoric, and extreme pride in American identity or United States identity. So, immigrant detention is a reflection of or has been influenced by the increase in numbers of immigrants and in right wing populism. It's known for inhumane conditions like freezing temperatures, a lack of sanitation, and overcrowding. The news articles in the past 5 years of what's been happening at the border are examples of these conditions. So my research question was, what are the impacts of othering on the experiences of Central American immigrants and refugees at the southwestern border of the United States? To begin with, what is othering? It's a sociological theory, and it's a set of dynamics, processes, and structures that engender marginality and persistent inequality among or across human differences based on group identity. That's a very academic way to say it means people in mainstream society create distance between themselves and other groups of people. So this is applied to all dominant systems. You can apply it to gender, you can apply it to race, sexual orientation, and in this case, I am applying it to citizenship status. So how do citizens create distance between themselves and non-citizens, and how does that impact the treatment of non-citizens? And then membership theory. This is also a theory that I utilized in my research, and it stems from the idea that we get positive rights or we gain positive rights from a social contract between the government and the people. An example of this would be if you are a citizen of the United States, you can hold public office, you can vote, and you get those rights by being a born citizen or a naturalized citizen. So the United States and countries across the globe have documents and guides for how they should develop immigration policy and how they should handle immigration crises at their borders. The UN Declaration of Human Rights, the United Nations, wrote this document to guide what rights should be upheld and should be honored and respected when nations are considering how to handle immigration in their sphere, and that is an international standard. And then we also have national standards. So the right to request asylum is guaranteed or should be guaranteed by the United States. In law, it is written that people should have the right to request asylum. And then the Flores Settlement Agreement of 1997 was a nationwide policy for the detention, treatment, and release of aliens. Aliens here is in quotation marks, because this is referencing undocumented citizens who are immigrating, or undocumented individuals. So the term alien in this context is actually a form of othering. And it's important to note that, because the idea that undocumented individuals would be considered aliens gives them an identity of non-human. And so that's an important consideration to make, but it is in this document as alien. So the United States has not followed these guiding principles, these guiding documents, or these recommendations. One prime example is the Remain in Mexico program. This program forces asylum seekers to remain in Mexico or stay in Mexico while their claims for asylum are being processed. This puts these seekers in danger of kidnapping, of violence, and of COVID-19. In the past year, this has become an additional concern. And that's due to the fact that they don't have homes in Mexico. People who are coming from Guatemala or Honduras or other areas or other countries, they stay in border towns, and basically there's a kind of a transient population there that's more vulnerable to crime. This policy is currently under review. The Supreme Court is supposed to hear it in 2021 to determine if it is constitutional or not. And then the zero tolerance policy. This was a policy that in which the Department of Justice prosecuted all adult aliens, in quotation marks, all adults who were crossing the border illegally, with no exception for asylum seekers or those with children. So this essentially disallowed or disenfranchised those who were trying to seek asylum, because you have to cross the border before you can do that. So these are both examples of the way the United States has put immigrants and refugees in danger and violated their rights. A lot of the way that we know how immigrants and refugees have been violated or have been objectified is through narrative accounts. So, for example, the El Paso shooting in Texas. El Paso is a border town in Texas, and so there's a culture of mixing between Mexican citizens, American citizens, people cross the border to work, and it's a very heavily Latinx community. There is a majority of Latinx individuals. So in this instance, an armed shooter drove miles and miles, hundreds of miles, to a Walmart in El Paso, Texas, specifically to target Latinx individuals, Latina individuals. We know this because he released a manifesto that mirrored language from anti-immigrant rhetoric, so xenophobic rhetoric. And this is an example of how othering can manifest itself. And Latinx individuals died in this shooting, and many more were injured. And then in detention centers, immigrants and refugees are processed in mass. Their rights are limited, and legal counsel is not easily accessible. It's very rare for them to be able to have representation due to cost, due to accessibility, and due to general confusion over who can and cannot be represented where and when. There isn't general consensus. In border detention centers, children have described conditions in which they slept on the floor, they went hungry, and were denied basic hygiene. So they went days without showering, brushing their teeth. They weren't given enough food, water, and all of this is an unacceptable way to treat anyone, of course. So what are the impacts of this type of treatment? Well, in detention centers, people have described a difficulty sleeping, not being able to eat, lack of appetite, and a general feeling of depression that results from the conditions they find themselves in. That is the most basic sort of condition. But what's important to recognize as well are the psychological impacts of this treatment. Asylum seekers and refugees often come from situations of traumatic experiences, and traumatic experiences can be triggers for psychological disorders or psychological impacts that can last for a lifetime. So when individuals who are already coming from more traumatic experiences and at-risk experiences, they are met with this type of treatment, and that trauma compounds on itself. So it adds up. And we don't know the long-term psychological impacts nor the extent of them. And that's really essential in understanding that we don't even know, understanding what we don't know, that we don't know what this has done to thousands of children and families. So what are the solutions to this whole situation? How can the United States be better and do better by immigrants and refugees? One of the first essential things is to end contracts with private prison companies. No company should profit or make money off of these types of conditions for immigrants and refugees. The immigration detention centers are based off of the prison or the carceral system in the United States. This means that they have contracts to fill certain amounts of beds, and they pay for that number of beds. The government does, that is. So without filling them, it seems like a waste of money for the United States, which gives them an incentive to continue to detain immigrants. So that is one of the first things that needs to change. Additionally, changing immigration quotas. We have quotas, or we have a certain number of immigrants that we allow into our nation each year that were written in the 20th century and are not applicable to the current situations in our world. These need to be changed to allow for an appropriate amount of or number of immigrants, so that wait lines aren't 10, 15, 20 years long, depending on the country you're coming from. Additionally, there is no legislation for immigration that's consistent. It differs a lot based on the administration in power, and while there is typically some variation in how administrations handle things, immigration policy can change overnight with a decision handed down. So the experiences of immigrants and refugees are not consistent, or haven't been, they don't know what to expect. It's difficult to know what to expect when going through the system, which makes it really confusing and really difficult to get it right, in quotations. So if we're ending private prison contracts, changing immigration quotas, and having consistent policy, how do we handle the numbers of immigrants and refugees coming specifically at the border? Because that is our main crisis. Community-based detention is a system in which those entering the United States will be placed within communities and given resources while they're waiting for their claims to be processed. This system has been utilized in Chicago with good results from the program on a much smaller scale, but the cost as well as the results have been a lot better. There is a community surrounding immigrants. They wouldn't be in detention camps that are so negative for their psychological health. the biggest argument for this system as well would be the economic argument. It is much cheaper than the private contracts that we currently have. Um, so in the future of immigration, these solutions would, if implemented, would drastically improve what we see today. That is the conclusion of my thesis. I want to thank Callie DeBellis for all of her work. Professor Callie DeBellis, she was my advisor and was incredibly helpful in developing my topic and being adaptable. And Dr. Maycomber in the sociology department for helping me kind of figure out how to mesh these two disciplines together. Thank you for your attention, and that's all.